It was a Tuesday late autumn when the first frost dusted the upper reaches of the Transylvanian Alps. November 7th, 2017. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and impending snow. A lone forestry worker, Mihai Popescu, was on a routine check of newly planted saplings near the old Postăvaru access road, a narrow, winding ribbon of asphalt largely unused since the ski resort rerouted its main entrance years prior. He was not looking for anything out of the ordinary, merely ensuring the young trees were undisturbed by early winter winds. His gaze, accustomed to the muted greens and browns of the forest floor, caught an unnatural glint, a splash of bright, almost electric yellow against the decaying leaves. He approached cautiously, the crunch of his boots on frozen earth the only sound. What he discovered was a cycling helmet, its vibrant yellow dulled by a thin film of dirt and moisture. It lay nestled amongst a scattering of rocks and fallen branches, some distance from the forgotten road. This was not merely lost property. This was an impossible discovery. The helmet, a high-end model, bore the unmistakable scuff marks of a violent impact. A small dark red smear, almost imperceptible, clung to the inner padding, its color faded but undeniable. Mihai, a man of the mountains, understood the implications. This was not an item merely dropped. This was evidence. The helmet belonged to Adrian Luca, a name that would soon become synonymous with an unsolved enigma. Adrian, a 42-year-old software engineer from Brașov, was an ardent cyclist, a man who measured his life in kilometers conquered and ascents scaled. He was a creature of meticulous habit, his life a testament to preparation and precision. Every ride was logged, every piece of gear maintained with a near-religious fervor. His disappearance nearly 2 weeks prior, on October 25th, had been a puzzle from the outset. He had set out that crisp autumn morning, a Wednesday, for what he called his peak season farewell ride, a final challenging circuit before the full snows rendered the higher altitudes impassable. His wife Elena had waved him off at 7 a.m. from their modest home on the outskirts of Brașov. He was by all accounts in peak physical condition, his specialized road bike, a carbon fiber marvel, perfectly tuned. His route, shared with Elena via a rudimentary text message, was ambitious, a loop that would take him through the lower mountain passes skirting the edge of the Postăvaru massif before descending back into the city by late afternoon. A familiar route, a routine challenge. The mountains, however, had kept him. Elena reported him missing at 9 p.m. that same evening, her initial concern blossoming into a cold dread as the hours passed without word. Adrian was never late, never. His phone, when called, went straight to voicemail. His cycling computer, linked to a popular fitness app, showed his last recorded position as 11:37 a.m., roughly two-thirds of the way through his intended route, high on a ridge overlooking the Prahova Valley. Then silence. The signal vanished. The trace ended. Just silence. Search parties, organized by mountain rescue and local police, had combed the area for days. Drones equipped with thermal imaging had flown grids over the dense forest. K9 units had tracked faint scents until they dissipated in the dry, leaf-strewn undergrowth. Nothing. No bike, no body, no trace of Adrian Luca. The discovery of the helmet nearly 2 weeks later and miles from his last recorded GPS ping only deepened the mystery. It was an object imbued with the grim weight of possibility, yet offering no immediate answers. It was a fragment, hinting at a narrative too fragmented to piece together. The helmet, when brought to the Brașov police station, became Exhibit A. Detective Inspector Andrei Popa, a man whose career had been built on the slow, deliberate untangling of human complexities, found himself confronted by an inhuman puzzle. The helmet was meticulously documented. A series of flashbulb transitions captured its every angle: the superficial scratches on the polycarbonate shell, the deeper gouge near the left temple, the faint, almost iridescent sheen of dried sweat on the straps. A macro shot revealed the minuscule bloodstain, no bigger than a pinprick, on the gray fabric of the comfort pads. It spoke of impact, of force. But what kind of force? A fall? A collision? The details were tantalizing yet frustratingly mute. The most crucial detail, however, was not immediately apparent. It was hidden within the helmet's sleek design. An action camera, a GoPro Session 5, was seamlessly integrated into the front, its lens obscured by a thin layer of grime. Its presence was a revelation. Adrian Luca, ever the meticulous documentarian of his athletic pursuits, always recorded his rides. This was his digital diary, his black box. The internal memory card, a tiny micro SD chip, was carefully extracted. It contained 10 gigabytes of data. 10 gigabytes. A forensic image was created immediately, a perfect digital clone to preserve the original evidence. The technicians worked in a hushed reverence, aware of the potential significance of what they held. This was not just footage, it was Adrian Luca's last known perspective, his final vision. It held the promise of revealing the impossible, of explaining the inexplicable void he had entered. The footage began with the mundane, a timestamp overlay, October 25, 2017, 7:03 a.m. The camera whirred to life, capturing the familiar driveway of Adrian's home, Elena's smiling face in the background as he adjusted his helmet, the mundane details of departure, the satisfying click of his shoes clipping into the pedals, the low hum of his tires on asphalt, the rhythmic thud of his heart, audible even through the subtle microphone integrated into the camera. He narrated his ride, a habit he cultivated for his cycling vlogs. His voice was calm, upbeat, filled with the quiet joy of a man embarking on his passion. "Morning, everyone. Beautiful day for a ride. Going for the Postăvaru loop today. Weather's perfect, no wind." A slow pan over weathered objects, a worn leather glove on the handlebars, a smudge of grease on his finger. Flashbulb transitions for time-stamped photos, 7:15 a.m., the city receding in his rear view. 7:48 a.m., the ascent beginning, trees closing in. The footage was clear, crisp, and unsettling in its normalcy. The first hour of the footage offered nothing untoward. Adrian cycled with practiced ease, his breathing steady, his cadence consistent. He navigated the winding roads with a quiet confidence, occasionally offering commentary on the scenery or his own performance metrics. Hitting about 25 kilometers per hour here, slight incline, heart rate stable, legs feel good. The audio captured the sounds of the mountains, birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream. Static-filled archival footage, a fleeting shot of a deer darting across the road, too quick for the camera to fully register. Text overlays of specific dates and times punctuated the ride, marking milestones. 8:30 a.m. First water break. Hydration is key. 9:15 a.m. Entering the forested section, shade is welcome. The camera's perspective, rigidly fixed to Adrian's helmet, provided an intimate, almost suffocatingly personal view of his journey. You were Adrian. You felt the subtle sway of his body as he leaned into a turn, the momentary blurring of peripheral vision as he accelerated. You heard the subtle creaks and groans of his bike, the wind whistling past the microphone. This immersive quality was both compelling and deeply unsettling, transforming the viewer into a passenger on a journey into the unknown. At approximately 10:45 a.m., Adrian began the steepest ascent of his planned route, a notoriously challenging section known locally as the Serpent's Back. His voice, though still strong, took on a slightly more labored tone. The sounds of his effort became more pronounced, the heavier breathing, the subtle strain in his grunts. Yet his spirit remained undimmed. "This is where the real work begins," he chuckled, a sound that would later echo with a profound irony. The landscape around him grew wilder, the forest denser, the light filtering through the canopy in dappled patches. The road, once paved with faded asphalt, deteriorated into a patchwork of gravel and cracked tarmac. This was the wild, unforgiving heart of the mountains, a place where human presence felt transient, almost an intrusion. Macro shots of dirt, moss, or rust. The camera lingered for a moment on a particularly ancient moss-covered rock formation beside the road, its surface a tapestry of greens and browns. The footage up to this point had been a testament to Adrian's preparedness, his expertise. The rule of irony was already beginning to assert itself. His strength, his knowledge, his meticulous planning, none of it would matter. Just before 11 a.m., Adrian noted a change in the wind. "Bit of a gust picking up now," he observed, his voice tinged with a slight unease. "Coming from the north feels a bit colder than forecast." The camera, however, showed no visible shift in the foliage. The trees remained still, their branches unmoving. This discrepancy, subtle at first, would later become a point of intense scrutiny. The wind was felt, not seen. It was a sensory detail that defied visual confirmation. A few minutes later, the first anomaly appeared. A brief flicker, a distortion in the camera's feed, lasting no more than a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, easily dismissed as a technical glitch. A momentary pixelation, a subtle shift in color balance, then gone. Normalcy resumed. Adrian continued his climb, unaware of the subtle glitch that had just punctuated his digital record. The mountains continued to keep their secrets, even as they began to reveal them in cryptic bursts. At 11:15 a.m., Adrian paused for a brief rest, leaning his bike against a weathered wooden signpost, its paint peeled and faded. The sign, barely legible, pointed towards an old forestry trail. He pulled out a water bottle from his frame, taking a long, measured drink. The camera offered a wide view of the valley below, a breathtaking panorama of autumn colors stretching to the horizon. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, no hint of storm, no sign of trouble. He pulled out his phone, checking his signal. "No bars," he muttered, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Expected that up here, but still annoying." The phone, later recovered in his car, parked at the base of the mountain, would show no outbound calls or messages after 7:15 a.m., confirming his early isolation. The evidence log, meticulously compiled by Detective Popa's team, would later list the contents of his backpack and car: a multi-tool, tire repair kit, energy gels, a first aid pouch, a spare inner tube, a small flashlight, a power bank for his phone, a physical map of the area. Every item spoke of preparedness, of an expert anticipating every conceivable challenge. Yet something inconceivable was about to unfold. He resumed his ride, the road now narrowing even further, encroaching vegetation brushing against his elbows. The forest floor was a thick carpet of fallen leaves rustling beneath his tires. The silence, once punctuated by birdsong, grew deeper, more profound. It was the silence of anticipation, the kind that precedes an unknown event. The subtle wind Adrian had mentioned earlier now seemed to manifest in strange ways, bending individual blades of grass along the roadside even as the larger trees remained steadfast, an invisible force, moving with a selective will. At 11:37 a.m., the time of his last recorded GPS ping, the second, more pronounced visual anomaly occurred. A brief, violent shudder of the camera as if Adrian had hit an unseen obstacle. The image distorted, streaking horizontally for a full second, the colors momentarily inverted like a photographic negative. Then it snapped back to normal. Adrian made an audible grunt, a sound of surprise, perhaps pain. "What the?" he mumbled, his voice strained. The camera showed him momentarily wobbling on his bike, his hands tightening on the handlebars before he regained control. He looked back over his shoulder as if searching for whatever had caused the disturbance. Nothing, just the empty road, the silent trees. The footage continued for another 2 minutes after this incident, Adrian cycling slowly, cautiously, his head turning from side to side, scanning the surroundings. His earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. "Did you guys see that?" he asked, addressing his unseen vlog audience, his voice barely a whisper. "Felt like something hit me, but there's nothing here." He paused again, breaking completely, his bike coming to a standstill in the middle of the deserted road. The camera captured his rapid breathing, the frantic darting of his eyes. He seemed to be listening. For what? The woods were utterly silent. The birds had ceased their calls. Even the rustle of leaves seemed to hold its breath. It was the sound of absence, a profound lack of ambient noise that was far more unsettling than any loud disturbance. The open-loop question began to form in the minds of those watching the footage years later. Why would he stop? What did he hear or not hear that prompted this profound halt? The mountains don't explain why. At 11:39 a.m. and 32 seconds, the camera captured the impossible. A sudden blinding flash of light, not from the sun but from something directly in front of Adrian. It was an intense, pure white light, so brilliant it momentarily overwhelmed the camera's sensor, blooming into an ethereal, formless void on screen. Accompanying the light was a sound unlike anything earthly. Not a bang, not a crash, but a high-pitched, almost infrasonic hum that vibrated through the audio, distorting Adrian's terrified gasp into an unintelligible croak. His body, as captured by the helmet cam, was thrown violently backward, the camera's perspective twisting wildly as he lost control of his bike. The final image captured by the camera before the feed went completely black was a fragmented, distorted view of the sky, streaked with an unnatural, almost electric blue. Then silence, utter, absolute silence. The timestamp froze, 11:39:33. The footage ended. The 10 gigabytes of thrilling footage concluded with an image of absolute terror and an unanswered question. The black screen that followed was not merely the end of a video file, it was the abrupt termination of a life, a sudden descent into an unexplainable void. The mountains keep their secrets. Imagine you are standing on that summit, on that deserted road, feeling the chill wind on your face, the silence pressing in. Imagine watching Adrian Luca's last moments, the mundane normalcy of his ride giving way to an inexplicable, terrifying event. The forensic analysis offered no comfort. The helmet's damage was consistent with a high-velocity impact, but with no identifiable source. No projectile, no collision debris. The small bloodstain on the padding was Adrian's, confirming his presence at the scene, but offering no further explanation for the impact itself. The absence of his bike, his body, anything beyond the helmet and its cryptic digital record, was the most profound mystery. Thermal imaging of the area around the helmet's discovery site yielded nothing, not even residual heat signatures that might suggest a recent human presence. It was as if Adrian Luca and his bicycle had simply been erased, leaving only a digital ghost of his final moments. The final warning etched into the melancholic landscape. Sometimes even the most prepared among us are powerless against the inexplicable forces that lurk in the silent, ancient places of the world. The void left by Adrian Luca was not merely physical, it was a conceptual wound that refused to close. For the grieving investigators, a small dedicated group of amateur forensic analysts and former colleagues who converged on digital forums, the silence following the 11:39:33 mark was not an end, but a trailhead. They obsessed over the metadata of the final file. They mapped the GPS drift, calculating the exact distance between the last satellite ping on the ridge and the discovery site of the yellow helmet. The math did not add up. To reach the location where Mihai Popescu found the helmet, Adrian would have had to travel over 4 kilometers of dense vertical terrain in a state of catastrophic injury, without his bicycle, and without leaving a single broken branch or disturbed patch of moss in his wake. It was a physical impossibility. Yet the helmet existed, the blood existed. The discovery was the bridge between the impossible and the undeniable. December 14th, 2017. 6 weeks after the disappearance, the first significant piece of physical evidence beyond the helmet was recovered. A group of hikers traversing a secondary trail known as the Frozen Creek Path noticed something caught in the ice of a small seasonal runoff. It was a single cycling glove, left hand, Specialized brand, black with a reflective strip. The palm was shredded, not by the friction of a fall on asphalt, but by something more granular, as if it had been scoured by high-pressure sand. When the glove was thawed and examined in a lab, the forensic team found something that defied the mountain's geology: microscopic traces of fused silica, a type of glass typically formed under conditions of extreme heat or atmospheric pressure. There had been no lightning strikes recorded in the Prahova Valley on October 25th. There were no industrial sites within 20 miles. The glove, like the helmet, shouldn't have been there, and it shouldn't have been in that condition. The evidence log grew more surreal with each passing month. In the spring of 2018, as the heavy snows finally retreated, the mountain began to yield Adrian's gear in a series of disjointed reveals. Each item was found in a location that suggested a chaotic, nonlinear dispersal. His carbon fiber bicycle frame was discovered on April 22nd, wedged into the upper branches of a centenarian fir tree, 30 feet above the ground. The wheels were missing. The frame itself was warped, twisted into an elegant but horrifying spiral, the carbon layers delaminated as if subjected to a massive gravitational pull. There were no impact marks on the tree trunk, no broken limbs leading up to the frame's resting place. It sat there, a silent monument to a force that ignored the laws of ballistics. The grieving investigators looked at the photos of the bike and saw a nightmare of structural failure. Why would the frame twist without snapping? The carbon fibers had been pulled, elongated, and then flash frozen in their new, distorted geometry. By the summer of 2018, the search shifted from a rescue mission to a forensic reconstruction of a tragedy. Detective Popa sat in his office surrounded by macro shots of dirt and rust, staring at the timeline. He looked at the expert victim. Adrian had been wearing a top-of-the-line heart rate monitor, a chest strap that synced via Bluetooth to his bike computer. The recovery of the bike computer, found buried under 6 inches of topsoil near the twisted frame, provided the most chilling data of all. While the video ended at 11:39:33, the heart rate monitor had continued to record for another 4 minutes. The data showed a spike to 192 beats per minute, a state of extreme physiological stress, followed by a sudden rhythmic oscillation that no human heart should be capable of producing. It was a perfect mechanical sine wave of 60 beats per minute, held for exactly 60 seconds before dropping to zero. It was as if the heart had been overridden by an external pacer. Flashbulb transitions for time-stamped photos, May 12, 10:15 a.m. The recovery of a single energy gel packet, unopened, found at the bottom of a limestone sinkhole, June 2, 2:40 p.m. A fragment of a cycling shoe, the carbon sole shattered into thousands of needle-like shards. Each piece of evidence felt like a taunt. The mountain was returning Adrian Luca piece by piece, but it was returning him changed. The narrative truth was beginning to emerge, and it was far more terrifying than a simple accident. The reconstruction phase required looking at the mundane items through a lens of high-gravity horror. The evidence log now included 1 yellow helmet, blood-stained, 1 warped carbon frame, 1 shredded glove, 1 shattered shoe fragment, and a bike computer containing a digital death rattle. What was missing was the most vital component, the man himself. The investigators began to focus on the impossible discovery of the light. They consulted atmospheric physicists and forensic imaging experts, trying to decode the 1.1 seconds of overexposed white frames at the end of the footage. They found that the sensor hadn't just been overwhelmed by light, it had been bombarded by a localized burst of high-energy radiation. The metadata of the video file was corrupted in a specific pattern, a bit flip error typically seen in electronics exposed to cosmic rays or high-altitude solar flares. But this had happened on a mountain road under a clear blue sky. The static-filled archival footage from the recovery team showed the experts standing in the exact spot where the light appeared, holding Geiger counters that remained stubbornly silent. The mountains don't explain why. Imagine you are standing where the bike computer was found. You look up at the fir tree where the frame was wedged. You feel the weight of the silence. You are Adrian Luca, and you have spent your life mastering the physical world. You understand gears, ratios, wind resistance, and the limits of your own endurance. You have prepared for every contingency, and then, in a fraction of a second, the physical world ceases to follow the rules you have mastered. The ground is no longer beneath you, your heart is no longer your own. The very air has turned into a blinding, humming void. This is the horror of the expert victim, the realization that expertise is a shield made of paper when faced with the truly unknown. By August 2018, the case reached a stalemate. The official report cited unexplained atmospheric phenomenon resulting in a catastrophic cycling accident, a phrase so hollow it served only to emphasize the void it tried to fill. But the investigators wouldn't let go. They began to look at the GPS drift again. They noticed that the items weren't just scattered, they were arranged in a wide, perfect circle with a radius of exactly 1.6 kilometers, centered on the spot where the light had appeared. Within this circle, the forest was subtly different. The moss grew in counterclockwise patterns. The migratory birds avoided the airspace. The macro shots of moss showed a cellular structure that was slightly elongated, as if the very flora was still recovering from a massive momentary stretching of space-time. The final piece of the physical evidence puzzle arrived on the one-year anniversary of the disappearance, October 25, 2018. Elena Luca received a package in the mail. There was no return address, no postmark from a recognized city. Inside was Adrian's wedding ring. It was pristine, no scratches, no dirt, no blood. But it was cold, colder than the ambient temperature of the room. When she took it to the investigators, they found that the gold had undergone a molecular shift. It was now a higher purity than should be possible for a commercial alloy, as if the impurities had been purged at a subatomic level. The grieving investigator proxy for the audience asks the question, if the ring came back, where is the hand that wore it? The narrative was no longer about a missing person. It was about the reconstruction of a narrative truth that the human mind was not equipped to handle. The slow burn rhythm of the investigation had led to a doorway that no one wanted to open. The evidence log was closed, the official search was over, but the open loop remained. Why did the light choose Adrian? Why did it return his helmet, his bike, and his ring, but keep the rest? The rhetorical echoes began to haunt the forums. The mountains keep their secrets. The mountains don't explain why. We are left with the 10 gigabytes of footage, a digital testament to a man who rode into a miracle and found it was a meat grinder. The camera, now a weathered object kept in a high-security evidence locker, remains the only witness. The technicians who occasionally review the footage for new forensic storytelling essays report a strange phenomenon. They claim that if you listen to the high-pitched hum at the end of the video, the sound that preceded the blackness, and you slow it down by 400%, the sound changes. It stops being a hum and starts being a sequence, a series of pulses, a code, or perhaps a voice. Not Adrian's voice, but something mimicking the cadence of human speech, a forensic casual tone that sounds like a chronicler of tragedy, maintaining a respectful distance while obsessing over the granular details of a life it just extinguished. As we move into the third phase, the reconstruction, we must look beyond the physical evidence and into the narrative truth of what happened on that mountain road. We must place ourselves back in Adrian's shoes on that morning of October 25th. We must feel the timestamp pacing of his final hours, 7 a.m., departure, 10:45 a.m., the Serpent's Back, 11:37 a.m., the first distortion, 11:39 a.m., the end of the world. The reconstruction is not just about finding a body, it is about finding a meaning in the meaningless. It is about justice through memory. But the memory is a haunting one, a melancholic loop of a yellow helmet falling through a silent forest. The reconstruction is an exercise in high-gravity emotional endurance. It is the phase where we stop asking what happened and begin to ask why the evidence refuses to conform to a natural death. To understand the narrative truth of Adrian Luca, we must look at the expert victim through the lens of a grieving investigator who refuses to accept the silence. September 14, 2018. A private forensic digital analyst, hired by a consortium of Adrian's former colleagues, began a deep sector scan of the 10 gigabytes of footage. They weren't looking at the images. They were looking at the metadata within the video containers, the hidden layers of information that record GPS coordinates, temperature, and altitude every millisecond. What they found was a digital scream. At 11:39:32 a.m., exactly 1 second before the camera feed terminated, the altitude sensor on the GoPro recorded a jump from 1,420 meters to 8,900 meters. A vertical ascent of 7 kilometers in less than 1/10 of a second. This was not a glitch. The sensor didn't fail, it reported. No signal, no trace. Just the cold data of an ascent that should have pulverized every bone in Adrian's body. The narrative truth suggests that Adrian Luca was not taken from the mountain, but taken through it. The evidence log, when viewed through this new spatial data, begins to look like a trail of breadcrumbs dropped from an impossible height. The warped carbon fiber frame found 30 feet up in a fir tree wasn't placed there, it was dropped there. The spiral distortion of the frame was a result of terminal velocity combined with an localized atmospheric vortex. The shoe fragments, the energy gel, the wedding ring, they were all part of a forensic reveal that unfolded over a year as gravity finally claimed what had been suspended in the void. But why the pattern? Why the perfect 1.6-kilometer radius? The investigators began to use thermal imaging on the satellite maps of the area from that day. They discovered a thermal scar, a lingering patch of ground that remained 2 degrees Celsius cooler than the surrounding Earth for months after the event. It was shaped like a perfect unblinking eye, centered on the stretch of road where Adrian last stood. October 3rd, 2018. The investigators turned their attention to the expertise of the victim. Adrian Luca wasn't just a cyclist, he was a specialist in high-redundancy systems. He designed software that could withstand catastrophic failures in server farms. He was a man who understood how to preserve information in the face of destruction. In the final seconds of the footage, when he asks, "Did you guys see that?" he isn't just talking to his vlog audience, he is talking to us, the chroniclers of his tragedy. He had switched his camera to a loop recording mode 10 minutes prior to the light. He was intentionally creating a buffer, ensuring that if anything happened, the most recent events would be protected in the camera's high-priority cache. Even in the face of the inexplicable, his greatest strength, his preparedness, was active. He was documenting his own erasure with the precision of a scientist. The rule of irony dictates that this very documentation is what haunts us. We have the data but no context. We have the metadata but no meaning. Static-filled archival footage from the initial search shows the rescue teams walking right over the spot where the thermal scar was later identified. They were looking for a body, for a broken man in a yellow jersey. They weren't looking for a rift. The grieving investigator proxy notes that on the day of the disappearance, 3 different local seismic stations recorded a micro-tremor at 11:39 a.m. It wasn't a tectonic shift. It was a localized vibration, a forensic image of the Earth itself flinching. The mountains keep their secrets, but sometimes the Earth leaves a bruise. Imagine you are Adrian Luca, and you have reached the 11:39:32 mark. You feel the sudden change in air pressure. Your ears pop with a violent, agonizing force as the altitude sensor registers the 7-kilometer jump. The slow burn rhythm of your life, the steady pedaling, the measured breathing, is replaced by a flashbulb transition into the stratosphere. For 1/10 of a second, you are the highest human being in the Carpathian Range, looking down at the curvature of the Earth from a mountain road. And then, the light. The reconstruction suggests that the white void wasn't light at all, but the visual manifestation of GPS drift on a cosmic scale. Space-time didn't just bend, it folded Adrian Luca into a pocket of the mountain that shouldn't exist. The evidence log now includes a new, harrowing entry, a fragment of a cycling jersey, recovered from the stomach of a predator 3 miles away in November 2018. The fabric wasn't torn by teeth, it was flash vitrified, turned into a brittle glass-like substance that shattered upon contact. This suggests that for a microsecond, Adrian was subjected to temperatures nearing 1,500 degrees Celsius, followed by an immediate return to the freezing October air. The mountains don't explain why. The open-loop question remains, was Adrian the target, or was he simply an observer who got too close to a natural phenomenon we don't yet have a name for? By late 2018, the atmospheric mystery had transitioned into a justice-through-memory campaign. Elena Luca and the investigators began to compile a forensic storytelling archive. They didn't want Adrian to be remembered as a missing person. They wanted him remembered as a witness. They began to play the audio of the 10-gigabyte footage through spectral analyzers. Beneath the high-pitched hum, they found a secondary frequency. It was rhythmic. It matched the mechanical sine wave of Adrian's heart rate, recorded by the chest strap, 60 beats per minute, a perfect artificial pulse. It wasn't Adrian's heart beating, something was broadcasting a heartbeat through him. The visual cue prompts for this phase of the story are cold and clinical: macro shots of the vitrified jersey fabric, text overlays of the altitude jump, 1,420 meters to 8,900 meters, slow pans over the thermal scar on a digital map. The documentary essayist voice remains somber, refusing to speculate, yet the granular details speak for themselves. The expert victim had been dismantled and reassembled by a force that understands geometry but not biology. The warped frame, the twisted ring, the sine wave heart, these are the signatures of an architect who doesn't understand the fragility of the materials they are working with. As we approach the final section of the reconstruction, the rhetorical echoes grow louder. The mountains keep their secrets. The mountains don't explain why. We are left with the image of the yellow helmet lying in the leaves, a vibrant yellow marker for a grave that has no body. The 10 gigabytes of footage is a loop that never ends, a 1.1-second tragedy that repeats every time a new investigator opens the file. We are looking for Adrian Luca in the pixels, in the metadata, in the frozen frames of an electric blue sky. But Adrian is no longer in the pixels. He is in the silence that follows the hum. Imagine standing on the Serpent's Back Road at exactly 11:39 a.m. on a clear October morning. You are looking at the spot where the light appeared. You are holding the yellow helmet. You feel the weight of the 10 gigabytes of data. You realize that the impossible discovery wasn't the camera or the footage. It was the realization that the world is much thinner than we believe. The moral warning is beginning to take shape. We build our lives on the stability of the physical world, on the reliability of our gear and our expertise. But there are places where the mountain road ends and something else begins. Something that doesn't care about your heart rate, your GPS coordinates, or your meticulously planned farewell ride. The evidence log is nearly complete. We have the artifacts, we have the data, we have the timestamp pacing of a man's final minute. All that remains is the narrative truth of the voice in the hum. The grieving investigator has one final lead, the 400% slowed down audio. It isn't a code, it isn't a language, it is a recording. The hum is the sound of the mountain road, recorded at 7:03 a.m. that morning, played back in reverse at a frequency that vibrates human bone. The mountain wasn't just taking Adrian, it was echoing him. It was a forensic casual reflection of his own journey turned into a weapon. The unexplained phenomena long form reaches its peak here. We are no longer in the realm of true crime. We are in the realm of the sublime horror of the unknown. The documentary essayist steps back, allowing the macro shots of the rust and the moss to tell the final story. The expert victim did everything right. He was prepared, he was capable, he was strong, and it was his very strength, his very presence on that ridge at that exact microsecond, that made him the perfect subject for the mountain's curiosity. Why would they do this? The question hangs in the air, unanswered by the frozen peaks. The narrative truth of Adrian Luca is not found in the resolution of his disappearance, but in the terrifying precision of his remnants. By December 2018, the grieving investigators had reached the limits of physical science. The reconstruction moved into its final, most somber phase, the reconciliation of the man with the data. They began to look at the metadata of the very last file once more, specifically the light sensitivity logs of the camera's CMOS sensor. In the final microsecond before the feed cut, the sensor recorded a pattern of light that wasn't random. It was structured. When mapped onto a three-dimensional grid, the light bursts formed a topographical map of the Postăvaru massif, but from an impossible perspective, from underneath. The impossible discovery was that the camera hadn't just looked into a light, it had been used as a flashbulb to map the interior of the mountain itself. Adrian Luca was not a victim of a crash. He was the accidental shutter in a cosmic photograph. The rule of irony reaches its terminal point here. Adrian's meticulousness, his 10 gigabytes of high-fidelity footage, was the very reason the event was recorded with such devastating clarity. Had he been a less prepared cyclist, had he used a cheaper camera or neglected his GPS logs, he would have simply vanished into the statistics of the missing. Instead, his expertise provided the forensic image of his own dissolution. The evidence log concludes with the most haunting item of all, a digital file that appeared on Adrian's home computer on the second anniversary of his disappearance, October 25, 2019. The computer, which had been disconnected from the internet and kept in a sealed evidence bag at the police station, suddenly powered on. A single 1 kilobyte text file was created. It contained no words, only a string of numbers, the exact GPS coordinates of every search party member who had looked for him, followed by a timestamp for each of their deaths in the coming decades. It was a forensic casual prophecy, a list of expert victims yet to come. The grieving investigator proxy looks at the flashbulb transitions of the search effort, the tired faces of the mountain rescue teams, the static-filled archival footage of the helicopters, and realizes that the mountain wasn't just keeping Adrian's secrets, it was watching those who tried to uncover them. The rhetorical echoes of the case, the mountains keep their secrets, transformed from a melancholic observation into a cold, predatory fact. The documentary essayist notes that the 10 gigabytes of footage has since been classified by the Romanian Ministry of Internal Affairs, removed from public servers, and replaced with a redacted summary. But the open loop remains in the minds of those who saw it. They remember the electric blue sky. They remember the sound of the reverse-recorded morning birds. They remember the mechanical sine wave of a heart that was no longer human. Imagine you are standing on that mountain road one last time. The sun is setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the asphalt. You are looking at the yellow helmet, now a museum piece of the unexplained. You realize that Adrian Luca's story is not a tragedy of a man who got lost. It is a tragedy of a man who was found by something that didn't know how to hold him. The slow burn rhythm of the investigation concludes not with a body, but with a moral warning. We traverse these wild spaces with our GPS units, our carbon fiber frames, and our action cameras, believing our technology creates a tether to reality. We believe that by documenting the mundane, we are safe from the impossible. But the metadata doesn't lie. The altitude jump doesn't lie. The vitrified jersey doesn't lie. The final visual cue prompt is a macro shot of the yellow helmet's visor. In the reflection of the plastic, if you zoom in past the grain of the digital image, you can see the last thing Adrian saw. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a craft. It was a fracture in the air, a shimmering geometry that looked like a staircase made of glass and static. And standing at the top of that fracture was a figure in a yellow jersey, looking back down at him with an expression of somber analytical reverence. The narrative truth is the most haunting realization of all. The light that took Adrian Luca was Adrian Luca himself, returning from the end of the timeline to witness the beginning of the void. The mountains don't explain why, because the mountains are merely the stage. The secret is in the observer. The forensic storytelling ends here, in the silence of the evidence locker. Adrian Luca remains an expert victim, a man whose preparation allowed him to document the moment he became a memory. The grieving investigator closes the file, but the open loop stays open. Why did he ask if we saw it? Because he knew that by watching the footage, we would become part of the record. We are the 10.1 gigabyte. We are the metadata. We are the silence that follows the hum. The moral warning for the viewer is simple. Some roads are meant to stay untraveled, and some mysteries are meant to stay in the dark. If you find yourself on a mountain ridge at 11:37 a.m. and the birds stop singing, do not look for the light. Do not check your GPS. Just ride. Ride as fast as your carbon fiber frame will allow, and pray that the mountain decides to keep its secrets for one more day. The investigation is over, the evidence is logged, the reconstruction is complete. Justice has been served through the act of remembering, but it is a cold, melancholic justice that brings no peace. The 10 gigabytes of thrilling footage remains a digital ghost, a slow-burn nightmare that reminds us that in the heart of the mountains, the only thing more dangerous than being lost is being found. This is the final entry in the chronicle of Adrian Luca. No signal, no trace, just the mountains, and the secrets they choose to share through the lens of a yellow helmet.